Hi, I'm Jean Shafiroff, and I'm on a mission. Anyone can be a philanthropist. My television show came from my book, Successful Philanthropy, How to Make a Life by What You Give. Won't you join me? Welcome to Successful Philanthropy. I'm your host, Jean Shafiroff. This show is designed to highlight the work of philanthropic leaders here in the United States and then beyond. With us today, Curtis Sliwa. He is the founder and president of the Guardian Angels. He's also a radio host, and now he's running for mayor of New York City in November 2021. He joins us on his campaign trail from his car. Let's all welcome Curtis Sliwa. Curtis, thank you very much for joining us. And before we talk about the Guardian Angels, I want to talk a little bit about you. You have decided to run for mayor of New York City. Tell me a little bit about why, and what do you think you can do for our city?
Well, I was the last candidate to announce just days ago because I wanted to see what all the other candidates, Democrat, Republican, and Independent, were talking about. And absolutely none of them were talking about supporting the police, getting the city back on track, reducing crime in the streets and subways. All they kept saying is they wanted to defund the police, take more money away from the police. And I said, that's crazy. So I am running on a campaign to refund the $1 billion that de Blasio and the city council took away from the police budget and restore all the specialized units that they disbanded, that has caused this horrific rise in shootings, in gang violence, in the crimes you read about and see every day on television, in the subways, in the streets, so that if we can restore public safety, a quality of life, people will want to stay in New York, people will want to come and work in New York, and we can once again return to the greatness and grandeur that New York City always was. Right now, we've slid into the abyss. And it's because there's one man single-handedly, Mayor Bill de Blasio, who has taken a wrecking ball to our city. He's got to go. Unfortunately, the many Democrats who would like to take his place are as bad, if not worse. So I've decided to step up and use the 42 years of credibility I built in the streets of New York City to say we're going to save our city by first refunding the police and taking back the streets and the subways from the criminals.
Curtis, if you become mayor, besides fighting crime in our city, what are the other issues that you want to tackle?
Well, first and foremost, there are so many emotionally disturbed persons roaming about in the streets, the parks, and the subways, and they're living there. And they need to be put into mental health care facilities where they can receive their proper medication on a daily and weekly basis. That's not happening. Governor Cuomo has closed many of the psychiatric facilities, state-run. Likewise, the mayor, Bill de Blasio, has closed municipal psychiatric facilities. So these men and women who are mentally impaired have nowhere to go. They're a threat to themselves, a threat to the other homeless that they live amongst, and a threat to the general population. So they have to be removed. This is not about their right to be able to stay in a street or stay in a subway. Nobody has the right to live in a subway, live in a park, or flop down on the sidewalk. That is ridiculous. The problem we have is there's a federal judicial order that says that New York City must provide shelter for anyone who needs it. So technically, you could take a New Jersey Transit bus from Bayonne, New Jersey, come to the Port Authority and declare yourself to be indigent without any means of support or any means of providing your own shelter. And the city, by federal court mandate, must provide you with shelter. That doesn't happen in other cities, only New York. So imagine if you were down and out, where do you want to come? New York City. And there's no vetting process to see where the people are from. So when dealing with the homeless issues, well, you got to first say, why are we opening all these shelters and yet we continue to have more and more homeless people sleeping in the streets, sleeping in the subways, and disrupting the quality of life? It's not good for them. It's not good for anyone else. So if they're homeless, they're going to have to stay in the shelters. We're going to have to provide them services because many of these men and women, they have severe alcohol, drug issues. They might be mentally unstable. They might be dysfunctional. The families might want them, but they have to get back on track first. All of these things are not being done by Mayor de Blasio or Governor Cuomo, and they declare themselves to be very liberal, progressive. They care about the indigent and the poor. But the proof is what we see. They don't. They've cast these people out. And if you don't deal with these problems, you're never going to be able to recover the soul of the city. We'll never be able to get back on track, attract people when Broadway opens up and the cultural centers and the restaurants and the bars, and all of a sudden tourists return because the vaccines have created enough herd immunity that we can all safely walk about in normal capacity without having those masks on our faces and without having to stand 6 or 3 feet away from one another. And then we have to look at the economic welfare of the city. We're going to have to come to a realization that every agency is going to have to do more with less. We don't have the right to print money like the federal government raises the debt ceiling, raises the deficit ceiling. I wish I could do that with my own personal finances. And I'm sure there are people out there who think similarly as I do. But you can't do that. You have to have a balanced budget. And I noticed that some of the other candidates, they're talking about universal income. We'll give people $5,000 a year. Where are they going to get this money from? They're already taking $1 billion from the police. I'm going to restore that. And yes, they'll have to trim the budget from education, which takes $30 billion out of a $92 billion budget. I don't know if we're necessarily getting the return on $30 billion when we have the Department of Education eliminating the 2 programs. They cater to young people who have studied hard, who have played by the rules, and are achieving academic excellence. I'm talking about the gifted and talented programs for younger children. My 2 youngest sons tried to get into gifted and talent. They didn't qualify. They're in good public schools. They're learning well. But that doesn't mean you eliminate gifted and talented. And also, for the academic achievers, there are the specialty tests to get into the better high schools in New York City. So you have Brooklyn Tech, Stuyvesant, Bronx High School of Science, Townsend on the Queens College campus, Staten Island Tech. And so a lot of Asians who are doing extraordinarily well because they're studying, they're playing by the rules, they're getting tutoring after school, they're being handicapped by the Department of Education that's basically saying you're doing too well, Asian students. We're going to have to put a cap on the number of Asians that we can accept into these special elite high schools. And that's not fair. That's not the American way. So we're going to make sure we maintain those standards. We're going to encourage more charter schools because there's already a waiting list, a lottery system for parents, mostly people of color who desperately want a better education for their children. And actually, we're going to help the parochial schools, whether they're Catholic, Lutheran, Jewish. We're going to provide them with vouchers and tuition tax credits because if you notice, they've been the ones that have been open in the pandemic. 5 days a week of school, in-school training. They have disproved the notion of the public school system that if you have in-school training, all of a sudden coronavirus is going to spread like wildfire to the adult teachers and to the children. And most importantly, vocational training centers and schools, because there are so many young men and women who could be taught skills that they can negotiate once they graduate as they become plumbers, electricians, carpenters. Do you know that 1/3 of those who program computers for Google have only a high school education? They learn computer programming in these special professional technical schools that we pay for as taxpayers with Pell Grants, incredible amounts of money so a child can go. So vocational training must be a primary objective and will be in a Sliwa administration.
Right. So what I'm hearing is that a priority of yours is education. Now, I want to go back to, you are the founder of the Guardian Angels, an organization that I believe you founded about 40 years ago. And from what I've read, you're now in 130 different cities. And you're doing a lot of work to protect people. Give us a little information, please, about the Guardian Angels and exactly what you do. Do you have workers that you pay, or are they all volunteers?
It's all volunteers. I'm a volunteer myself for 42 years. We just celebrated our 42nd anniversary of serving the people of New York City and patrolling streets and subways. But as you pointed out, we're in 13 countries, 130 cities, democracies, dictatorships, third world countries, first world countries. And there, everyone is a volunteer. We've trained them how to patrol their communities as guardian angels. They all do that voluntarily. in addition to whether they're working or going to school, dealing with their personal or professional circumstances. We have unarmed patrols that go into high crime areas. When things go awry, we will make citizens arrests. We will detain suspects until the police arrive. It's a right that citizens have in most countries around the world. And so we exercise that right, but it requires good training. So you have to have not only basic self-defense, training people in first aid and CPR, because for every one criminal situation we come across, there are 10 medical situations. People have to become knowledgeable about what the law permits a citizen to do, so you're not violating people's rights. And you have to set up situational training. You know, a domestic dispute you're asked to intervene on, a gang fight, a bar fight, people who are robbing, stealing, maiming, looting. All of these things require us to practice consistently so we can be very effective, as we have been for 42 years, and not be aggressively creating problems by violating other people's rights, by grabbing the wrong person, using excessive force. And the checks and balances for anyone out there who wants to know, well, first of all, especially in America, where there are 10 lawyers for every one citizen, they practice a martial art different than ours. It's called I sue. So if we cross that Maginot line, they will sue the Alliance of Guardian Angels, Inc., a 501c3 nonprofit. And most importantly, they'll come after me personally. So that's the checks and balance. We could be arrested if we violate someone's rights. We don't have the same rights as a trained professional police officer has, but we are an effective force, particularly in high crime areas, of dealing with gangs, drugs, and guns.
Yes. Now, and if people want to donate to the Guardian Angels or they want to become volunteers with you, can you give our audience the website?
Oh, sure. And it'll tell you everything we do globally and locally, because it's not just patrols. We have a junior guardian angel program to deal with youth who are 15 to 6 years old. We keep them out of harm's way. They don't go out on patrol, but they do other community service. We have the Guardian Angel Animal Protection Division, which actually rescues dogs and cats, some of whom are in our shelter systems and scheduled for euthanasia within 72 hours. I can tell you this much: when I become mayor, that's going to stop. We're going to have no-kill shelters. But we rescue the dogs and cats now because they are subject to being euthanized. And then we have a whole host of other programs in terms of caring for the elderly, the indigent, the poor, the impoverished. And you just go to guardianangels.org. That's guardianangels.org. You can see what we're doing globally and what we're doing locally here in the city of New York for the past 42 years.
Yes, and I think your work is really very noble and has to be praised. But I wonder, with all the crime that New York City has recently experienced, have you found that you have a reduced number of volunteers and that the work is more difficult, or what's happening exactly?
No, in fact, it is the basis of supply and demand. The demand is so great for our services. We are now patrolling neighborhoods that previously I would never have thought there would be a Guardian Angel patrol. In fact, when I first started back in 1979, if I walked through the Upper East Side wearing my red beret, red sateen jacket, the Upper West Side, Chelsea, Little Italy, Chinatown, all areas that we patrol now, people would have said, please don't walk through the areas. People will think we have a crime problem and our property values will plummet. Now they can't get enough Guardian Angels presence because the police have been rendered impotent by this Mayor de Blasio. It's almost like they've been exposed to kryptonite. They become reactive, not proactive, and Guardian Angels are filling the void. And in many of these neighborhoods I mentioned, all of which are in Manhattan, we've actually recruited and trained young men and women from these specific communities to patrol their own communities: Black, white, Hispanic, Asian, males, females, gays, straights. It matters not. We get them all collectively trained and they voluntarily patrol their community. And that's a form of empowerment, so that you don't have to be totally dependent on government, which is always a dollar short and a day late. And most officials, they always promise you, we'll take care of you from the cradle to the grave. What happened to self-help? What happened to people dealing with problems in their own community? Why does government always intervene and say, no, we don't trust the people, we'll take care of you? And they don't, and they can't, and they shouldn't. I trust people. That's why there are so many thousands of guardian angels globally, many of whom I don't even know. But I know they've been trained appropriately. I know that they will follow the tenets and standards of the guardian angels, which is we dare to care. It's us and we, not I and me. If you trust people, then good things are going to come about. If you just trust government, you're always going to be disappointed.
For our viewers, we are with Curtis Sliwa. He is the president and founder of the Guardian Angels. He's also a talk radio host, and he's now running for mayor of New York City in 2021, November 2021. Getting back to you and your platform for mayor, how many years do you think it will take for New York City to really come back, for our economy to get going, for the streets to be cleaned up? How many years? Is it 5? Is it 2? Is it 10? What is it exactly?
Well, I'm a survivor of the 1970s when New York City was on the verge of fiscal dissolution because New York City government had misspent its money. And they went to Washington, then President Gerald Ford, and wanted a bailout, wanted to declare Chapter 11. And if you remember, there was a famous headline in the Daily News, Gerald Ford, president, then said, drop dead New York City. And he was absolutely right. We got into our own mess, and then we wanted to put our corrupt beak into the trough of the taxpayers to get bailed out. And the federal government said, no, if we do it for you in New York, we will have to do it for other municipalities all throughout America, and it'll cause economic chaos. So we're going to have to do more with less. In the 70s, 1 million residents of New York City fled. Now we saw just over the summer, 300,000, mostly Manhattan residents, mostly from the Upper West Side, Hell's Kitchen, Chelsea, and the Upper East Side fled. More are continuing to flee. And there's a very good chance they're not going to come back. My job as mayor is going to be a cheerleader, to try to encourage these people to at least come back and visit their family and friends, spend their money in New York City when we become the entertainment and cultural capital of the world again. But I'm not going to wish them harm like Mayor de Blasio has, who's told them, hey, leave, and hopefully the door doesn't hit you on your toches on your way out. And in fact, we have to be realistic that as we speak, people are already being encouraged to move to Florida and Tennessee and Georgia and North Carolina and South Carolina because it's cheaper. It's a better quality of life. The schools in many instances are better. And naturally, New York City does not appear like it's going to get back to where it needs to be, like it was with 20 years of Republican mayors, 8 years of Rudy Giuliani, and 12 years of Michael Bloomberg. So if you're leaving, and obviously you're taking capital with you, you're taking job skills. Companies will follow the workforce, and they are. We're seeing them flee to Miami and Austin and in Texas and other places. So if we don't straighten this situation right and get New York back on track and open the restaurants, open the bars, open the cultural and entertainment centers quickly and not wait as de Blasio and Cuomo have done, we're going to see that additional New Yorkers, corporations, entertainment, and cultural entities will flee. And there's a very good chance they're not coming back.
And do you think the tourists will come back?
Eventually, sure, the tourists will come back because New York City has always been a mecca. You know, to see the Empire State Building, to go and see the Statue of Liberty, to see the 9/11 site, the site of the attack where the World Trade Center used to be. All of these places are still going to exist. The question is, though, we cannot exist simply by the amount of money that's generated in the hospitality industry by tourists pouring into New York City. We have to have work for the day-to-day people. And let's face it, one thing the pandemic taught us, you don't need to be in New York City. You don't need to be in a glass and steel and concrete structured building in order to do your work. You can do your work virtually, stay in your community. And as New Jersey, Connecticut, and Pennsylvania are now telling the workers who are working virtually from their own homes, your taxes go to us. It doesn't go to New York City because you're no longer in New York City.
Yes. Now, there's been a lot of talk about a movie about you and your life. And if a movie were produced, a Hollywood movie, who would you want to play you, Curtis?
Well, I'm the comeback kid because remember, I've had prostate cancer, ileitis, colitis, chronic Crohn's disease. It almost took me out. I got shot 5 times with hollow point bullets. on the orders of John Gotti Sr. to John Gotti Jr. by the Gambino crime family in the summer of 1992. So I've taken a licking and come back ticking. So I'm trying to figure out who should be the comeback guy in Hollywood. How about Pee Wee Herman playing Curtis Sliwa, styling and profiling his beret and his red sateen jacket? I mean, it could be any number of people. The story needs to be told. There's a documentary out there called Vigilante. If people ever want to find it and see it, it'll show you what it was like, the startup of the Guardian Angel, which was a baptism in fire. And there used to be a television movie called We're Fighting Back, which was on CBS many years ago, back in the 80s. But you're right. A full-length picture is needed now so that people can understand you don't have to wait for government. You can actually, through self-improvement, organize people just like yourselves to make a difference in your community, your country, and in our world.
Yes, and if you had to give some advice to our viewers about living in New York City, what 3 things would you suggest?
I'd say first and foremost, you got to watch your back, especially at night. It's like zombies roaming about in Dawn of the Dead. These are people who are mindless, not in control of their mental or physical faculties. You have to be careful of them. They can be extraordinarily dangerous. Secondarily, you have to understand that you must do what is best for your family and extended family. And if that means that you decide you're going to leave, I would just ask you, to make sure that you do it in a manner in which you're not being pushed out, but you're leaving because you want to leave to the best possible circumstance. And then in the third area, we have to preach a concept of us and we. Too many of us are into this I and me thing. We do things by myself, for only my family. We have to start thinking more of community. That's something I've always done with the Guardian Angels in 42 years. And it's something I know that I can bring people together around as the next mayor of the city of New York when we get rid of this dope from Park Slope, Bill de Blasio. So if anybody wants to help me in that venture, just go to CurtisSliwa4Mayor.com. CurtisSliwa4Mayor.com. We're in a race now that I was the last one to jump in on. So we need to raise the money to be able to compete. And hopefully some of the folks who are watching and listening might be able to help me save our city.
Now, Curtis, we have about 1 minute left. What advice would you give to our young viewers who are just starting out in life? As a person of influence, what advice do you give young people?
Do not, under any circumstance, ask what government can do for you. Start showing what you can do for your family, your community, your circumstance. There are Democrats, Socialists of America, justice warriors out there. Their whole pitch is gimme, 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 me, give me money. Whatever happened to being idealistic, having initiative, wanting to improve yourself so that your family benefits, so that your community benefits? That's the American way. Look, I've proven that. So many other Guardian Angels of all different backgrounds have proven that. This new generation that's come about, the Generation Z, after the hipsters and millennials, they can do it too. They just have to have faith in themselves. I have faith in them that there'll be a better generation than my generation, the baby boomers. But they have to start showing faith in themselves and not just doing it technologically, as they're sexting and texting their life away. You got to start getting serious because they can resolve a lot of the problems locally and eventually globally through self-help.
Thank you very much for joining us, Curtis. Today with us, Curtis Sliwa. He's president and founder of Guardian Angels, talk radio host, and also candidate for mayor in November 2021. I'm Jean Shafiroff, your host. I'll see you next week.